is just showing how the fatal trauma for cyclists, riders, has been performing over the last 2 decades, so the last 20 years. And we can see that, there has been a bit of a cyclical up and down, but that dotted line represents, that trend line. And you can see it's relatively flat. So there's not a significant amount of movement. Over the last 20 years, we've basically been seeing 40 or so cyclists killed on the road network every year across Australia. And that's been pretty consistent, which is pretty disappointing to hear. If we compare that to how we're tracking with vehicle fatalities, so in the last 20 years, we've certainly seen lots of investment in road safety programs across our jurisdictions. And we have seen lots and lots of benefits with our reductions in trauma for passenger vehicles, so for those that are driving cars. If we do this as a measure of the actual population size as well, we do see that the rider fatalities, or those people riding a bike, there is a downward trend there, but it's not as steep as what we're seeing for vehicle fatalities. So in other words, yes, we are seeing as a percentage of the population, rider fatalities are decreasing, but not to the same extent as we are seeing for vehicle crashes. So there's certainly some work to be done within that space to see greater parity between those two road users, and hopefully seeing much better numbers, so we're not just always hovering around that 40 deaths per year for riders. In terms of demographics, it's probably unsurprising that men make up the bulk majority. About 83% of all rider deaths are male, and the reason I say unsurprising there is just because men tend to be riding in those higher risk environments, which could be in on-road scenarios and high speed, which is where your risk of being killed is significantly higher. So it's not such a great surprise to see that men are definitely overrepresented in that area there. So I just wanted to start with those kind of statistics to try and tie in exactly why we are talking so much about safe cycling infrastructure and the importance of delivering this these treatments that we'll be going through today, and we've been talking throughout the course, because it's really about creating safer cycling journeys for our community, and not just accepting that, we can continue with this trend and hope that things will magically fix themselves. Well, it takes a real concerted effort, and something that we can all do to help improve those statistics. Today's module is on roundabouts, and of course a roundabout is an intersection type, so we could have potentially lumped this into the module 3, but we've deliberately separated it just because there's very specific considerations associated with roundabouts, very recognized risks associated with roundabouts. At a very high level, it's kind of well understood that if you compared a signalized intersection with a roundabout for general traffic, a roundabout has much better safety outcomes. So because a roundabout physically slows down vehicles, they can't just, run a red light and go straight through there. They have to slow down to get around. That's one of the main benefits of the roundabout. The other thing is that, if you've got two vehicles going to collide at the conflict points, the collision angles are also a lot more friendly. You compare that to like a T intersection or something like that. It doesn't have that 90-degree crash angle. It's got a much more acute, so vehicles can kind of glance off of each other and gradually wash off the force involved in those crashes. So it's pretty well established that roundabouts do a wonderful job for safety improvement for general traffic. However, by that same expression, it's also well evidenced that roundabouts perform quite poorly for riders and also for pedestrians. So there is that disbenefit. Pedestrians and riders tend to fare better where there's signalized crossing points and priority given to them. So we kind of acknowledge that going forward, and we talk about, well, what can we do within the roundabout space to, try and make that improvement for our rider community. There's no Wally in today's session, so please don't be on the hunt for Wally. We don't have any of this fellow in today's module. Instead, we have an assignment, and I have allocated a good piece of today's agenda just to go through with that assignment, and you can ask any questions that you have so it's crystal clear. As mentioned, this is being recorded, and we will see this on the webinar after today. Okay, hopefully everyone managed to watch the video footage from our last module where we had a look at the protected intersection, as well as example 2, which was just a conventional intersection and using the hook turn box. Love to hear feedback in the chat. Today's agenda will very closely follow what we had structured in our previous module. And one of the documents that we do refer to quite often is this guidance on bicycle and pedestrian treatments at roundabouts. It's 2016, so it's a few years ago now, but there's still very relevant findings in there. Lots of good information. And we've also got the bicycle safety at roundabouts, the Austroads research report. I think I mentioned this in module 1, where if Austroads is commissioning a research report, it tends to show the volume or the significance of that issue. So the fact that they've actually said we need to know more about cycling safety at roundabouts, and they're willing to put, X amount of dollars to fund a research project, really exemplifies that there's a pretty significant risk here and something that we can do better within industry. And one of the ways that we can do better within industry is through the implementation and design of protected roundabouts. I will go into exactly what that looks like and the design elements of a protected roundabout. I'll show some international examples and then have a look at something that's a bit closer to home that would look a bit more familiar, and that's Melbourne's protected roundabout. I'll have a bit of a chat about multi-lane roundabouts and the other, particular issue with multi-lane roundabouts. So yeah, there's some pretty significant risks that you need to be considering if you're working within that space. And at the other end of the spectrum, we'll talk about, well, what about our local roundabouts where we do have much lower traffic volumes and much lower operating speeds? What can we do within those environments? So very, very similar structure as our last module, and I'll just get stuck straight into it. Just a reminder, if you could please pop your questions in the Q&A. It just makes it easier to administer so that Ainsley working in the background can quickly answer your questions in the Q&A function. But any kind of chats or any examples that you wanted to share, you can keep that in the chat function. So 2 different methods there. Alrighty, so this is an artistic rendition of Melbourne's protected roundabout. And the first thing that you may notice is that the bicycle facility is kept away from the circulating area. So you're not forcing riders to coexist with traffic in the circulating area. It's one of the really kind of critical component of these protected roundabouts is getting your riders away from that circulating area. And we'll discuss why you would be wanting to do that in just a moment. The other thing that I really like about Melbourne's protected roundabout, and it's not, a requirement of these features, but where the conflict point exists at each leg of the roundabout, they've actually raised those conflict points. So we know that's where we've got raised crossing points, we have a much better chance of actually slowing vehicles down and making them yield, making them give way. If that was just at grade with the circulating area and with the carriageway, and riders had to go down onto that carriageway level, there's a bit of that priority confusion once again, who gives way to who. So really, really good practice to raise all of those legs and award priority to your vulnerable road users, which is your pedestrians and your cyclists. So I'll talk more about this with Melbourne's protected roundabout later on, but just wanted to give you a high-level view of what that one looks like. And we can get stuck into a poll for today. And we've got a little figure up here. This is taken out of the Austroads report that I mentioned at the start. And within this figure, we can see that there are 3 cyclists, which is cyclist A, cyclist B, and cyclist C. And the module poll question is, which cyclist do you believe is most at risk? So I'll give you 25 seconds to have a look at that figure and make a judgment call. Another 10 seconds, maybe not marked on this, so don't get too stressed. All right, and we might end the poll there and we can share our results. And okay, it looks like we're getting a bit of a diversity in answers, which is actually a good thing to see. It's pretty common that we do see, people with different opinions on this. And to be honest, all of those riders are at risk. So I think it's pretty valid that you've selected any of those responses. If there was a fourth option, which would be all of the above, that's probably the one that I'd pick. But rider A here. So although they have passed kind of the exit leg, they're at this point in time where the vehicle in that yellow car, so the motorists in the yellow car, they may see the vehicle that's already entering the roundabout in that purplish color. So they may see that vehicle that's already entering the roundabout and be like, okay, I'm good to go. And then just drive straight into the roundabout without looking forward. Because as that yellow vehicle is approaching this, they are 100% focused on the right of them. They're just looking for oncoming traffic. That's all they're paying attention to. And they're not necessarily thinking of looking straight ahead where there could be a rider within the circulating area. So I certainly agree with that one. The rider B, well, I think they're definitely in quite a precarious situation there, because it appears that that purple vehicle has already started to enter the roundabout, indicating that there's likely to be a collision as that rider is, traveling around that area. So that's also a bit of an issue. And finally, rider C there, well, same kind of issue there with yellow may, assume that they're safe to go out. And as they're entering the roundabout, collide with C there. Alternatively, as C was coming around here, it's also quite a risk where you could potentially be collected by a vehicle that's exiting that roundabout. So this figure is used within the Austroads report just to show how vulnerable riders are in basically a lot of different scenarios within a roundabout. And so a protected roundabout gets them away from that environment altogether, because it just acknowledges that, there's not really a safe position to put yourself when you're in the circulating area. The other kind of phenomenon that is discussed within this research report is the idea of a motorist that's at these roundabouts or any type of intersection, really, when they are looking within the circulating area, they're actually focused on looking at cars. Like they're just trained to look for the large metal cage. And whilst they may, see a rider or see someone riding a bike, they may not process that as they have to actually yield to them. Like it's just like something in the periphery or something that's not necessarily cognitively understood. So we do have this weird psychological thing, which is like you look but don't see. There's lots of different studies in that if you're interested in learning more. But basically, vehicles as they're approaching roundabouts are looking for other vehicles, and riders can become invisible. And that's also true of motorbike riders as well, just because they're so much smaller, and it's just not what we're trained to look for. Few years ago now, there was an evaluation completed which basically looked at police crash reports of bicycle crashes within roundabouts and did a bit of an analysis around, well, what were the crash types occurring within that roundabout? So what were the type of movements? Now, this is a bit of a synopsis just to give you the high-level summary of what that evaluation concluded. If we have a look at the red solid arrow, that is representative of the vehicle, and the green dotted arrow, that represents the cyclist. So the first crash that we look at here, the 68% of crashes that were analyzed was an entering motor vehicle versus a rider that's in the circulating area. So that is exactly what I explained before of that phenomena where it's a vehicle, may look at a cyclist, but fail to register them and just enter the roundabout. And that's where you've got the collision. So that is, that's quite a significant amount of the trauma is occurring with those types of crashes. The next one is a cyclist crossing as a pedestrian, which is about 8% of crashes analyzed. And this is where, a rider may be like, I don't feel comfortable riding through this roundabout, so I'm going to use adjacent footpaths, or maybe that's where the path was anyway. And the reason that you may see these crashes occurring is because as the vehicle is exiting their leg, they've actually got their foot on the accelerator and they're not necessarily expecting to see users crossing that carriageway at that location. That's also why pedestrians tend to be, experience quite high levels of trauma at roundabouts, is this type of crash type where you're exiting motor vehicle and pedestrian. They've got this awkward point where it could be difficult for each of them to see each other, or they don't necessarily know if that motorist is leaving that leg. And so you've got this conflict point, and yeah, that's both a pedestrian issue and a cyclist issue, but that's around the 8% mark. This one always surprises me. So this is exiting motor vehicles. So you've got a car that's already in the circulating area versus circulating cyclist, which is recorded as 9%. And anecdotally, and this is completely subjective, that is my number one fear as a rider. I get very, very nervous that as I am within a roundabout, that vehicle would be exiting the leg, failing to notice that I'm there and, potentially colliding with me. But I guess it's good, it's refreshing not to just your own biased opinion and instead reflect on what studies have researched. And this is saying, well, it is 9% of crashes, but it's actually not the predominant crash type that is occurring, which is the other way around. So anyway, just a bit of feedback there, but certainly something that I'm incredibly wary of as a rider, and I'm sure other riders there would be familiar with that kind of very tense feeling, particularly if you're turning right again at a roundabout. and you're worried about a vehicle failing to see you, failing to see you've signaled to go right and they're just going through. It's, yeah, anyway. There's actually an example in today's 360-degree video where I'm riding through a roundabout similar to what's shown here, and I'm doing a right turn. And if you flip the camera kind of behind me, you can see a vehicle that's going through, and you may be able to appreciate, you know, that level of tenseness and, yeah, how awful it feels. Anywho, the last one here is a side swipe within the roundabout. So, you know, a vehicle that is basically failing to stay within the traffic lane and could be veering into the bicycle lane. We have lots of bicycle lanes on the periphery of roundabouts, which we'll talk about later. And that's at about the 10% mark. Another 5% were just other, meaning that they didn't have enough information to make a decision on how to categorize this, or just kind of other random accidents that occurred. Okay, so that's just to set the context of our roundabout journey. So we understand that there's pretty significant trauma occurring here, and we understand what types of crashes are occurring. Now, how do we go about mitigating that? What design solutions do we have? Well, one of them is, of course, grade separation. If you haven't seen this site, this is a very cool example. This is the Hovenring in the Netherlands. And that is an exclusive bicycle path that is grade separated. Here's what it looks like from another angle. And it just basically means riders don't have to deal with that massive motorway underneath, and vehicles don't have to deal with any riders. It's just completely separated, and it's just a really awesome example. If you've ever got the money to do Hovenring, I suggest you go for that, but that's not actually an example of a protected roundabout. That's just grade separation. I'll talk about protected roundabouts, which is a little bit cheaper than what's been shown there. So this is, I guess, a general arrangement of what your protected roundabout may look like. As I mentioned before, what we really need to be affirming as a core objective is getting our riders away from the circulating area. So we're no longer forcing the cycling community to get into that area where we know there's so many different types of crashes that can occur, and we're seeing lots of trauma. Instead, let's not even bring them into that space. Let's take them away, get them offset from that circulating area, cross at a very defined, discrete location, and preferably awarding priority to your riders, just so you've got that continuity of services. And also, as I mentioned before, best practice is raising where that conflict point is. So you're slowing down motorists and increasing the likelihood of motorists actually yielding and giving way to your riders as they cross there. Okay, I've got this little diagram as well, which just shows kind of the key points that we spoke about. So we've got a number 1 here, which is our cycling crossing points. So similar to what we talked about with our protected intersection, you do want to keep your pedestrians and your riders separate at these locations, rather than just use a shared facility. Just because of the speed differential there, it's a good idea to separate those vulnerable road users. Number 2 is yield lines. Basically, you know, we wouldn't use that sharp tooth line marking there, but give way pavement marking. So vehicles are aware that they have to give way to pedestrians and cyclists that are crossing at that location. This one I'm going to cross out, which is bicycle stop line. So you would either do one or the other. You wouldn't do both. So we would be recommending that you force general traffic to yield where that's appropriate, and let your riders have the right of way going across the carriageway. But you certainly wouldn't do both of them, because then you've got priority confusion. So just be mindful of that. Number 4, 5-foot curb radius. Don't need to worry too much about that. Number 5 there, I wouldn't say is essential either. It's just, creating that physical separation between pedestrians and riders. So it's not just one shared area. You've got 2 clearly demarcated zones for your different users there. And finally, number 6 is just ensuring that all your signage is up to spec and relevant to your particular jurisdiction, because each of us tend to sign these things a little bit differently. So just make sure that you're using what is relevant to your particular area. All right, I will hop into some international examples now. Before I do, though, I will just check in with Ainsley and Marissa to see if I've missed any questions.
I'll jump in with a quick one, Max. Not sure if you know this, but have there been any studies on crashes at protected roundabouts just to see how the stats do compare to traditional roundabouts?
A very good question. So we did, as in Safe System Solutions, we did evaluate the effectiveness of Melbourne's protected roundabout. And we got all of that data beforehand, prior to installation. Post-installation, I don't have the exact figure at the top of my head for crash reduction, but I do have some other figures that I've got within this presentation, which I'll include later on. So I can dig that information out for that person that's interested.
Perfect. Thanks, Max. And then I guess a bit more just about a general point rather than a question. But Catherine has said in the chat that it is a great design and it could be used retrospectively on improving cyclist usage / safety in a more local roundabout environment, which I think we will dive into a little bit further on, but also a great point to make. Yeah,
so you probably wouldn't see these being used in, multi-lane environments or arterial or anything that's really busy. Certainly Melbourne's is in a local environment as suggested. Just because as you get multi-lane roundabouts, then you get the issue of that, as I talked about in the previous module, that dynamic visual obstruction, or where you could have one vehicle that blocks the sight lines of the other, and then you just can't actually see any cyclists that could be crossing there. So they don't tend to get used in those higher capacity roundabouts. That's really when you'd be hoping for grade separation. Thanks, Ainsley.
Thanks, Max.
No worries. So I've got an example here, and I'm going to spend a bit of time now just going through some international examples. This one is in Assen in the Netherlands. And what we've got here, for those who may have already noticed, is quite a large, generous footprint. So there's actually quite a lot of space involved in actually constructing this particular protected roundabout. Now, just as a demonstration, if you were riding from the bottom of the screen and wanted to turn right, this is actually an example of a bidirectional protected roundabout. So there's a few ways that you could do this. If it was just one direction, you'd probably have to do something like this. But because this is bidirectional, you've got this opportunity to just cross in a much more convenient manner, taking something a little bit quicker to do. But that's generally how it's used. You're not really being encouraged to use the circulating area. The path kind of leads you onto this off-road facility, which is well and truly away from that circulating area. And as you can see, at each of the legs, there are, priority markings there. So you've hopefully got motorists yielding to your cycling traffic through there. And just to show you how this one looks like out on the ground, so you can see that the path here, the bidirectional path, connects across, and as we're riding across here, you would be awarded priority. So you're not forced to just slow down and yield to vehicles as they're exiting the roundabout or entering. You've actually got the right of way in those scenarios. Marissa.
Max, Lucas just identified that the paths look very close to the building. What are the impacts to the path and offsets when you have a building on a zero setback?
Right. Yes, it does look very close. It could just be this particular aerial. I mean, it probably is built right up to the edge of the property boundary, so right at the edge of the road reserve there. And if you don't have the setback, you know, I guess you can run into issues with the actual landowner there and things like maintenance and all those types of implications. Or if you're actually under the, you know, if there's any protruding, overhanging cantilever structures and things like that, there can be other issues. But I wouldn't say they're kind of showstopper elements. I think they just need to be, yeah, worked out on a case-by-case basis. And yeah, there's a good point there. I'd sort through that. It could potentially have sightline issues if you do have physical structures or, you know, lots of vegetation adjacent that property boundary that could, yeah, impact on sightlines. And with all the sites that we'll show, like, it just demonstrates using what land that you do have and trying to maximize the efficiency of your design. So I've got other examples that show exactly how you're trying to get the most out of what you've got as a footprint. Thank you very much. So the other thing I wanted to mention about this one is, because it is so large, you can see that what I will just call like the offset, or this distance here, which is kind of the edge of the circulating area to where the conflict point is, or where riders are crossing over. So a relatively large space there. In this example, it's about 2 vehicles long. You can actually kind of see it on the other leg there as vehicles are entering. And, you know, what that means is you've got a really good opportunity there for, well, pros and cons. As vehicles are exiting, they've got a much improved ability to see cyclists and pedestrians as they're crossing over, because once again, that conflict angle is near to perpendicular, which means you've improved those sight lines there. So that's a pro. One of the things that you do need to be mindful of is that the further that you push this back, so say it was brought back here as a crossing point, number one would be riders will then become less incentivized to use that path because it's just too circuitous, it's too far away. And the other thing is that as motorists are exiting, the more space that you give them, the more that they've got time to accelerate, to pick up speed. And then if you're saying you have to yield again to give way to pedestrians and cyclists, well, they just may not be inclined to do so because they could be reaching higher speeds. So there is a balance, once again, where you don't want to bring things too close or too far. Generally, the rule of thumb is about 1 vehicle as a setback. So a vehicle that is exiting can, you know, yield and give way and prop and not block the circulating area. But once again, it's one of those examples where you have, got to have, you know, a little bit of an iterative process around what would be the best use of land and acknowledging your different objectives. So here's another example in a more confined, constrained environment, much more urban. This is in Rotterdam. And you can see we've got our circulating area here for vehicles. And then basically directly adjacent, or an outer ring, is where the riders would be located. Now, this does mean that riders don't have as far to travel. So the previous example where I did that right turn, you saw that it was quite circuitous to get around there. In this example, you know, it's basically as close as you could get without actually physically entering the circulating area. So it's more attractive in that sense. But what we do have is, previously I showed the benefit with having further offset distance was improving your side angles. Well, this is the other side of the coin, where very conveniently in this aerial image that I took, I've got a vehicle that is exiting the roundabout, and I can also see a rider as they're coming around here. Now, I'm sure, as you could imagine, if you were in that vehicle, for you to be able to, you know, twist your neck backwards and be able to see a rider that's in that spot there, or perhaps even closer, it's actually very difficult. And that then, you know, as I've said before, like you really want to ensure that you're trying to maximize your sight angles, sight lines, so it's as easy as possible for vehicles to be able to see any of those conflict points and, you know, be able to yield to them. So the closer that you are bringing your bicycle path to that circulating area, the more that this sightline angle becomes a bit of a risk. So just to reiterate, I'll show this on the ground as an example, and I might bring in a little car, a little Porsche number. And if you put yourself in the perspective of that Porsche driver, and let's just say they were exiting at this leg, very, very challenging for you to be able to see the rider that is kind of on your passenger door side, unless you've already made eye contact with them prior to the roundabout. But in saying that, you may have also assumed that they were hopping off at that leg. You know, you may have assumed that they've gone somewhere else, or they're slowing down or something like that. So there's a whole raft of reasons why the driver may assume that they're fine to exit that leg. But because of this configuration, the way that it's set up, it's actually quite difficult to make that eye contact with the rider as they're crossing over. So this example is one where you've got a much more constrained space, and you don't have that offset between where the bicycle path is crossing and where the circulating area is. So we saw one where there was a big one, and this is a small one. And this is like, I can't remember what that child's story is with the 3 bears, and this one is like just right, something like that. I don't have kids, in case you're wondering. But this one is kind of that happy medium, I guess. This is Fendon Road, which is in Cambridge in the UK. This was opened in 2020. And, you know, Cambridge has done wonderful things over the last few years about creating a real cycling hub of activity, and just being, one of those pioneering cities that have really embraced cycling infrastructure. And just, this is the way that we want people to get around. Probably helps a lot that they've got such a strong university population there as well. So people are probably more inclined to get on the bike. Anyway, this is an example where it's not as large of a footprint, but we're also not going as close as possible as we can to the circulating area. Instead, as I mentioned before, what I think is a good rule of thumb is basically trying to get one vehicle propped on the exit leg so that they're not going to be blocking the circulating area. And that's probably a pretty happy medium, where it's not going to be too far away and, you know, detract cyclists from using it. It's not going to be too close where you're going to be impacting on sight lines, but yeah, you've still got a better case scenario for both of those examples. Now, just to show you what this one looks like on the ground as well, you can see as these riders are crossing over, you know, this motorist here is in a much better position to be able to sight oncoming cyclists. So they're no longer at their passenger side door where they could be in the blind spot. They're basically crossing in front of them, and it's just a much easier opportunity to see that conflict point. So being able to yield. All right, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to play this video, which is a protected roundabout in use. And this is just going to loop a few times so you can have a look at, you know, what this actually looks like at an operational level. And as this plays, I'll check in with Ainsley and Marissa to see if we've had any questions.
I can jump in with a couple of questions, Max. So one that's just come through is, would it be better to have signals that a roundabout where ped and cycle movements are high?
So yes, there has been examples of using meter roundabouts. I know there's quite a big one in Melbourne, just on not Punt Road, Alexandra Road. And yes, they can certainly offer benefits for pedestrians and cyclists crossing there. But there can also be disadvantages with that as well, whereas the protected roundabout kind of offers that continuity, that flow for riders, because they've basically got right of way as they're crossing at all of those features. With the signalized, you could potentially have the issue of riders forced to do right turns and stop multiple times to get their phases, which can, add to the detract from that particular feature. But to be honest, I'm not really sure of a study or any research that's actually gone into a lot of detail about how that could potentially offer significant benefits. It's a good question. Let's give a prize out there.
Perfect. And just another quick one, which I think might tie into the end of that answer there, is there any information about traffic flow thresholds for these roundabout designs? I assume internationally there might be a little bit of information.
Yeah, so
kind of locally.
Yeah, once again, the evaluation that we did for the protected roundabout within Melbourne, we did a bit of that analysis, and at a very high level in terms of congestion, if previously you had just a free-flowing roundabout with no opportunities for, riders to have right-of-way crossing all the legs, that would probably flow a lot better for traffic and you'd have a better, improved level of service. However, once again, it goes back to that rhetoric around what you're actually trying to achieve here, which is safer opportunities for riders at these locations. And in fact, I think the Melbourne one is a really good example. I speak about the history of that project in the 360-degree video for today, which is basically like, this isn't going to improve congestion and this isn't going to make it easier to get in your car and drive through here. This is to improve the safety for riders because they've acknowledged that this is one of the locations where they just hate going through because it's super uncomfortable. So I think that's really the objective of these projects. And yes, it is very possible that you could have things like queuing issues within the roundabout. You could have potentially an increased risk for side swipe crashes or rear end crashes within the roundabout itself, but the severity of those crashes are very, very low. Like people walk out of those things and they have to call their insurer or they have to get in touch with a panel beater and that's it. Whereas if you've got a rider that is hit within a roundabout, that's usually an ambulance. Like it's very rare that is not going to become a serious incident. So I think there's lots of evidence and I suppose merit in trying to promote that cycling safety component as opposed to always just going to congestion.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's a great point. There is a couple of other questions in the Q&A in the chat, but I noticed that some of them will be covered shortly in your presentation. Okay. So we might leave them for now and come back to them if there's still a question later on.
Thank you so much, Ainsley. So hopefully you had a good look at this one as it's driving through. I think it's a pretty cool example. Interestingly, you may have noticed that the bottom leg here is bi-directional and kind of all the way around here is bi-directional, but this one is just one way. And also this one leg looks to be raised, whereas the other ones don't appear to be. You can see the piano key line marking. That's usually indicative of a raised crossing. Anyway, I just wanted to show that like these things aren't just theoretical. They can work. You saw the bus that goes through there as well. And, people slow down and people give way and it can function. It's not just an academic thing. I'll get stuck now into Melbourne's protected roundabout. And we've got an aerial snapshot of how things looked before the introduction of the protection. And what was previously installed was these bicycle lanes, which existed on the periphery of the roundabout. We've already spoken about why we don't like to see our riders kind of in that situation. You know, vehicles may assume that they are going through a roundabout or turning left when they could be turning right, and you've just got these awkward sight lines and the conflict points and conflict angles and things like that. So this is what was previously installed, and this is how things look like today. I might just zoom in on this after image because I'm going to focus on this for the moment. One of the things that you may notice is kind of the shape of the bicycle path. You've got this, is it octagon? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, octagon shape, which some people really, really hate. Some people are completely oblivious that it's actually shaped like that until I mention this, and then they go and ride it and they're like, oh yeah, that is weird. It is obviously a lot more comfortable if you are riding to use smooth curves. So if you could do like an outer ring with one radius, that is a more comfortable experience. In saying that, personally, I don't think that the angles within this design are particularly terrible or anything like that. It's just, yeah, some people find it very upsetting. But a question I wanted to throw out to the group, so get ready to type your answers into the chat. I have spoken about all the wonderful benefits associated with the protected roundabout design. But looking at this image, is there anything that you can deduct that could be perhaps a disadvantage or something that is not very attractive for riders using this facility? So I'll give you 30 seconds to have a think about that. All right, I can see lots of very good answers coming in. Queuing of the traffic, absolutely. Giving way to PEDs is an interesting one. I know, I understand that kind of concern there. I do actually prefer this than riders being given right of way over pedestrians, because I think it's much less likely for pedestrians to yield to riders than the other way around. But noted, one way, not bi-directional, the angles of it, the narrowness of it, the weird kind of things that are going on these legs, that it just seems to be starting out of nowhere, these bicycle lanes, like it's not continuous on each of the things. Vehicle storing on the approach, yeah, potentially blocking the bike lane. Line marking stops after the roundabouts. Yep. All very good points. The one that I'll give a prize out to Marissa, and I do agree with everything that was said there, but the one that I had in mind in particular was the longer journey time it is for right turn. So I spoke about that previously, but it's particularly relevant in this example. So basically, to turn right using this facility, you'd be doing that kind of movement, whereas previously you would have just done this. And of course, looking on an aerial and drawing this with my finger, it looks fairly, you know, negligible, the difference. But as you're riding, you know, it can be a little bit of a nuisance to go out of your way, particularly if you don't understand why those types of features have been installed or what's going on there or how to use it. And so to some extent, some people do deliberately just not use that. And that's exactly what this next slide was showing, which, you know, some people are, you know, basically either not aware of how to use this roundabout or don't want to have to take that more circuitous route. And as part of the evaluation study that we did for this site, we did some counts to see how effective the different movements are in attracting different cyclists. And we got about 91% of riders that were traveling through this location did use the protected facility. So 91%, if you're going through, used this part, the protected facility. Pretty good. For those that wanted to turn right, that statistic went down to about 77%. So if you were turning right, about 77% went, nah, I'm not using that. I'm taking the circulating area, and you know, that's what I'm going to do, which is, some people see that as a bit of a failure on the project, that we should have expected, you know, 100% compliance, every rider using the protected roundabout, because that's where we've got the safety benefits. But I don't tend to think of it quite so negatively. I think we've got those diversity and skills that we've talked about many times within the riding community. And regardless of what you kind of implement, I think people will make their own risk assessments and, you know, ride what they think is the most suitable or what they feel most equipped to do at that point in time. So I'm not particularly disheartened by those statistics. In fact, 77% using the safer facility, I think, is pretty awesome. And also the statistics that I don't have here, but there was also an increased participation on this route as well, showing that more riders were using this as opposed to the alternatives within the area. If, however, you were in an environment where you really did want to kind of corral riders into, no, we actually do need to see, you know, 95% compliance using the protected facility. Well, I'll give you a bit of a snapshot of how things look like on approach to these legs. And well, one of the legs is just a bit of a stencil with a bicycle symbol and an arrow, and just says use bike lane at roundabout. And I'm sure, as you could appreciate, if you're a rider, it's just as easy for you to go that way as it is that way. So it doesn't necessarily do that much. Similarly, with the example on the right-hand side, this other leg that we're seeing here, if it was your project objective to get much higher level rates of compliance for using the protected facility, you could literally just block the separation all the way up to the circulating area. So it's just, you know, if you really wanted to do it, you could, but it's probably going to be more inconvenient for you to access the circulating area. So you could just include that curb and channel all the way up to it. But even then, it's unlikely you're going to get that 100% compliance. So it's probably not the most useful measure there. Just looking at the time, I think we might pause here and take a break. And I'm going to allow for 4 minutes. So 4 minutes, please, back in your seats, and we will continue with our module. Hello, Ainsley.
Hello, Max. Just a quick one before we head away from this example. There's a question in the chat to just say, do you know if this is a council-owned road that the roundabout is on?
I am 95% sure this is the local road. I always get nervous when I get asked those questions because I'm pretty sure it is, but there's always a risk that I'm wrong. But I do speak about this in the 360-degree video for today as well.
Perfect.
This is Moray Street, actually. Moray Street in South Melbourne, if anyone wants to Google that.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay. Feel free to keep the questions coming in. I'll get stuck into our next module now, which will be talking about multi-lane roundabouts. I've got a wonderful example of one just here. And these are much more precarious situations for riders within this environment. This particular site was randomly selected, but there could be, you know, any multi-lane roundabout, which has got riding facilities on it, that looks something similar to this. And you could just do the exact same risk identification that we're going to be doing here. But I will just start by saying, yeah, I'm going to be focusing on a rider that is coming from the right of the screen. So it kind of looks like a footpath there, but that is actually a, yeah, kind of a raised cycle track or, yeah, off-road facility where riders are encouraged to position themselves. And as a rider is coming up and approaching this roundabout, the first thing that you may notice is the actual facility gets narrower and narrower. It gets squeezed. Now, the reason that's occurring is because some swept path design would have taken place and a heavy vehicle would have been used as the example. And it would have noted that the edge of that heavy vehicle, you know, follows that path that I've just crudely drawn there, which so happened to mean that the bicycle lane just gets narrowed, which is automatically not such a great thing. You certainly want to make your facility width continuous, particularly as you are entering these kind of high risk scenarios. So this is not a good example at all. Within the circulating area itself, we've got this random little bicycle lane adjacent the splitter island and then nothing else. That's obviously showed on the other side as well. But not a lot of positives going on for this roundabout. Now, what I want to talk about in particular is if you were a rider wanting to turn right at this location, there's a few ways that you could do it. The first would be riding along here and then dramatically stopping, slamming on the brakes and picking a gap in traffic, crossing over there, again stopping, picking a gap in traffic, and then completing your right turn there. I should just clarify, there's no curb ramps at this location, so that there's nothing really that would promote that movement or anything like that, but that is theoretically one way a rider could perform that right turn movement there. The other way a rider may perform a right turn movement, which is probably more common, would be staying in this lane here and then crossing over like that. Now, hopefully immediately you can see the risks associated with that because it's basically turning right from a left turn lane if you were in a vehicle. In other words, you've got through vehicle crash that could occur there and a through vehicle crash that could occur there. Super, super precarious. And once again, both of those crash angles are not conducive to good sightlines. If you were riding, you would have to be, looking back over your shoulder and seeing if there's a gap before making that decision to turn right there, which is certainly not something that would want to be encouraging, but does occur within these environments. The final way that a rider may be turning right at these locations is just to ignore this facility altogether because they're like, well, I know that I don't want to turn right across two live traffic lanes. So instead, I'm just going to try and push myself prior to this roundabout, prior to the approach, and get into the right turn lane. So I can just act as a vehicle. And that then leads into, well, you have to get over to that traffic lane. So that's going to be uncomfortable. And also it's just got that same, risk where motorists that are in this position ready to enter the roundabout may not expect to see a rider or may not cognitively recognize a rider there. And so got that fail to look, see. Anyway, few different scenarios there, all of which are not very conducive to safe movements for riders. just to show you what this one looks like from the ground level. It's a bit clearer to see how that bike lane really does narrow on the approach, which is very strange indeed. And you may have noticed in the previous image that there was a stop line there. That's that solid line there. That's a stop line. And in this image, you can see that there is some signals. Fortunately, that's got nothing to do with the cycling infrastructure. It's just there's a rail line there, and that's for the boom gate. So when those boom gates go down, vehicles aren't turning left to then potentially block up the roundabout. Anywho, just wanted to show you that. Hopefully you can all appreciate why all of those right turn movements are not at all safe for a rider, and having that facility there is just really not doing much for attracting diversity in cycling or providing a level of safety for cyclists. I should have also confirmed that this is quite a high speed, high volume road as well. So this is 100 km/h or 80, so it could be 80 in a it is a rural environment, but just on the outskirts of a rather large township. I'm going to compare that to something that we can have a look at. This is in Canberra, and as you can see, it looks very, very similar to that other example, just in terms of how the carriageway configuration looks. It's very, very similar. The way that the cycling connectivity is dramatically different. So once again, I'll focus on that right-hand leg just for consistency. And we've got an on-road facility that gets taken off-road. So there's a bit of a passage, there's a curb ramp that really, encourages riders to take this as this is where you should be going. Don't head towards the circulating area, but doesn't necessarily say that they couldn't do that. Anyway, a rider comes through this off-road facility and then they get moved around and away from the circulating area once again. At this location, there is a hold rail, or one of those kind of U-bollards, which is basically an area where riders can stop. They've got something to grab onto. That's particularly relevant for any riders that use cleats on their shoes, because then they don't have to unclip and, try and stand up. It's just a lot easier to grab a hold of something. So very good idea to include them at these crossing points. It's forcing the rider, though, to actually slow down and give way to any traffic that could be entering or exiting that stream. And then they'd cross over once they've got that gap. They get to this point here. Once again, there's another little hold rail for them to grab on. And they can cross over here before completing that journey. Now, of course, this is more circuitous. This is a much longer journey for a rider to perform that right turn. However, multi-lane environments that are high speed are just not areas where we're likely to be able to get vehicles slowing down and yielding to cyclists. It's just the way that our transport corridors are set up and the way that we kind of view our movements priorities. It's incredibly unlikely that we would be able to prioritize our cycling traffic at these locations. So instead, let's make it clear that, okay, riders, you need to actually slow down and give way at these locations and pick the gap. Let's bring you away from the circulating area and make sure that we've got nice open sight lines so you can quite easily identify where those gaps are, but you're not going to just be able to ride through this, kind of maintain your speed if you were to do any of those right turns. So now, of course, as I did mention, whilst this off-road path does corral riders into using that facility, it's once again not like that is exactly what you have to do. For those riders that don't want to do that, you could certainly access the through traffic lane or push across to the right traffic lane and perform your movements from there. So it does still provide those riders who are training, for instance, that they are able to maintain those speeds. But those that just don't feel comfortable doing that, they do have this ability to, position themselves in somewhere that's safer, where they can make more conscious decisions in those areas. So we'd much prefer to see this as an outcome as opposed to just seeing the bicycle lane being used in the periphery. In fact, for anyone that has seen this figure, this one used to be incorporated into the Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 4B. It's been superseded. In fact, it's no longer in the guidelines at all. The reason being is we just no longer encourage putting bicycle lanes within the circulating area of multi-lane roundabouts. It's just like, no, it's far too risky. We don't like to do this at all. So this has been deleted from our Austroads guides. The reason I include it here is because you may have hard copies of these papers. So just make sure if you do have any of those lying around the office, just get your big red marker and say this has been superseded. And then you can also just say, Max told me to do this. That's completely fine. Because we're no longer recommending that as a treatment. It's just not a safe outcome for our riders. Now, speaking of our movement priorities and the way that we kind of classify our network, I've included this as a concept design option that was looked into as part of a project. And it really demonstrates how our treatment choices can reflect how our movement and place classification or link and place, depending on where you're from, how those two can tie in together. So for those that haven't done any movement and place kind of thinking or any training within that, it's basically just acknowledging that, our roads, our transport network have two kind of significant functions. One is movement. We need to get people, goods, traffic through this area. And the other one is that they've got, place value. They've got lots of interesting things where people just want to be and spend time or go to work. And they've got these two different functions. So it's generally plotted as an XY graph. For our corridors, which have higher movement functions and low place value, they're basically our motorways. So things that are just highways. It's just like, we just want people to drive through here. We don't really want anyone pausing and dwelling. There's no place value. So they're generally higher speeds and things like that. And automatically, just looking at this concept design, I would suggest that this east-west leg, left-right, that would be a high movement function corridor because it's a divided carriageway. And just historically, we've designed divided carriageways to be movement functions. So that is automatically what that's queuing to me. Conversely, we've got a undivided carriageway that is also just one lane on entry and exit, which could indicate that perhaps this has a lower movement function and could lead into more residential areas where there is a place function and things like that. So the north-south leg suggests to me a lower movement function. So of course, these are all just assumptions. And I'm just doing this as a point to illustrate how we can tie in our treatments to our movement categories. Now, the reason I'm making this statement is to show that where the movement function is lesser or not as important, perhaps those are areas where we can actually say, well, that's really where we can be recommending raising our crossing points and awarding our priority to our riders and our pedestrians. So in this design detail, they've said raised crossing with priority given to mammals. They've actually used the term mammals, as well as recreational cyclists and pedestrians or pedestrians crossing minor road. So they said, like, this is just the areas where the movement of that through traffic is not as important. So we're just going to get a raised crossing in there, and we're going to give riders a nice experience crossing there. Conversely, where riders are crossing over the motorway or the significant movement function corridor, they are not awarded that priority. Instead, the design note is saying install grab handles for cyclists at crossing points. So riders are forced to yield to general traffic there. And I think that just demonstrates that we can think about these issues dependent on what is your surrounding movement and place categorization, and that can then impact on what type of infrastructure you'd be putting out there. The other one I like to include this is because if this is a major movement leg for general traffic, it's likely, not necessarily all the time, but it's likely that that same direction would be a major movement leg for riders as well. So you're kind of maintaining that east-west connectivity for general traffic on the carriageway, and you're maintaining that continuous level of service for riders as well, because that's where their major attraction is. So I think that's a pretty savvy example. Anywho, it's that time of day where we, of course, ask what is wrong with this photo, and we've got another confused cyclist standing there, and I'll get rid of her so you can have a bit more of a look, but give you 30 seconds to pop down in the chat what you think could be wrong about this. I'll also give a bonus prize if anyone knows where this location is. So tell me what's wrong with the photo and tell me where this photo was taken. All right. Lots of very similar issues emerging there. And also I saw the correct location. This is in Launceston in Tasmania. This is Alphen Road, Brisbane Street and Lawrence Street. It's a peanut roundabout, which is pretty cool. And yes, so well spotted for those that noted the dooring issue on this side of the road. That's very glad to see that that has been picked up. Cyclists having to merge in suddenly with traffic, or the inability to get onto the adjacent footpath, like there's no parts, no curb ramp to get up there, is what I was after. So we'll give a prize out, Marissa, to the person that mentioned the bike lane suddenly ending. Let's say the third person that put that in the chat, we'll give a prize out to that person. But yeah, similar to what we discussed within the intersections, where historically designers have kind of just ended the facilities for riders and just kind of done a no man's land. That same approach has generally been applied to roundabouts as well, which is obviously not a great outcome, as you can appreciate. We wouldn't just do traffic lane ends and then nothing. So, ideally, you'd love to see some connectivity, maybe to an off-road facility, so that you can maintain riders' confidence there and they know exactly where they're going to go. Or if you were to push them into the roundabout, into the circulating area, you'd want to be ensuring that you've got low speeds, ideally low traffic volumes, and generally the way that this is achieved is through the use of sharrows. So the other way that this kind of treatment is referred to as is like the BAS treatments, which is using sharrows to encourage riders to take a central position within the traffic lane as they are entering the roundabout. And then that's also repeated within the roundabout itself. So within the circulating area, you would see those sharrow markings being repeated throughout that roundabout, just to encourage that. Now, ideally, when you are installing these things, what you actually want to be doing is ensuring that you've got vehicles that are slowing down prior to the merge point. So you can consider this as your merge point where riders are coming in to take the traffic lane. You'd want to be putting in some speed, local area traffic management treatments. So it could be a speed cushion or something like that, so that you're physically slowing down motorists prior to where the rider is coming in and taking the traffic lane. You run the risk of, if you're just using paint, that vehicles are just completely unaware of what's going on here and why is a rider just, riding in front of me now. So supporting that with infrastructure that physically slows down motorists is definitely the preferred approach there. We already spoke about the dimensions and things like that for sharrows. I've got a few examples of what that traffic calming could look like. In this example, it's not a perfect example because you can see that the bicycle lane kind of ends, and that's the sharrow treatment. And then you've got the traffic calming or the speed cushion. As I mentioned, ideally, you'd want to be bringing this feature back prior to that merge point. So you've slowed down traffic before that conflict point exists. It just means they're much more likely to slow down within the roundabout. And if there was to be a collision, vehicle speeds would be much lower. So we don't have the same level of severity. And I'm not sure if Ken covered this within the module 2 course, so I will just repeat this. If he did, feel free to interrupt me and say, no, we know this, that's okay. But what I'm going to do is just like a quick diagram to show the relationship between the probability of a fatal crash, which is on the y-axis, and the impact speed in kilometers per hour. And the way that this graph kind of looks like is something like this, where at about this point here, things get exponentially worse for riders involved in these types of collisions. So this is the vehicle impact speed versus a cyclist and the probability of a fatal accident occurring. And the speed that this occurs is about 30 kilometers per hour. And the reason that I'm encouraging this is because whenever we do have our conflict points occur, so if we've got any merging occurring where we could have a rider being struck, we want to bring those vehicle speeds down to 30 kilometers per hour or lower to significantly reduce the risk of a fatal incident occurring there. So keep that in mind as you're doing any of those designs, because that's a useful figure to reference. Another example here of just that traffic calming being used on approach to a local roundabout. So once again, riders are being encouraged to take the traffic lane, and also within the roundabout itself, there's additional sharrows being used so that they take a very prominent position within the traffic lane and they're not just riding within the periphery. Really, the only times you'll be doing this are local roundabouts. So you don't have the space to be doing protected roundabouts. You can't grade separate because we don't unfortunately rain money in this country. So you're just looking at lower speeds, and well, I can put in a few speed cushions on each of the approaches. So hopefully bring down those speeds and make it more comfortable for riders to access the traffic lane and feel like that they can perceive that that's a comfortable and safe thing for them to do. Okay, before I get stuck into some education campaign things, I will check in with Ainsley and Marissa to see if I've got any questions.
I think you clarified it right at the end there, Max. There was just a question about when sharrows should be used in terms of if you can do a protected roundabout. Of course, that's our first option, and then sharrows are an option for a little bit later if we don't have the space for a protected. And then there was another point which I think you clarified as well, just about should an additional sharrow be installed in advance of the merge point?
Yeah, okay. So the way that I've traditionally seen sharrows used is they are an indication of when the actual shared space is commencing or when it's, starting. I think if you put it back too far, that could, if there's a bicycle lane there and then this is also being installed there, that could create a bit of confusion for riders. So I tend to see this kind of arrangement where you could have a little arrow that says get ready to go across, and then the sharrow being installed just after where that facility is being ended.
Yeah, perfect. And another one which is a little bit more general, can be for intersections as well. But is it possible to only treat particular legs of the intersection rather than all of them, if you know what the primary route of the riders are, and then also if there's budget constraints or other issues like that?
Great question. Give a prize out there, Ainsley. Yes, I think that's a very, very reasonable thing to do. Particularly, as you say, if you've got the primary, strategic cycling corridor, or your cycling highway is running north-south, and there's only local residential access, east-west and things like that, it may be cost prohibitive to be doing, significant upgrades at each of those locations and each of the minor legs as well. So instead you focus your money on where, that significant volumes are, or where you've planned for your significant volumes to be. And that's also particularly relevant if that cycling treatment is only on one side of the carriageway. So then you may actually only be treating minor legs, say on the western side of this corridor, and everything on the east would remain the same. So yes, I personally think that you can have different, you could be focusing your infrastructure improvements to where your cycling corridors are going, as opposed to every single intersection needs to be consistent. And in fact, the video that you'll watch as part of this module shows that of a protected roundabout, but only one of the legs has that protected facility. The other legs do not. So it's a real tangible example of that in practice.
Perfect. Thank you, Max.
Oh, that's it. Great. Thanks, Ainsley. I'm going to hop into some educational things at the moment, purely as an acknowledgement that infrastructure and engineering can do wonderful things to improve our transport network. And we definitely know that, we've got studies and evidence to back this up. But we do have to acknowledge that we're working within a society which has lots of different views on the cycling community, on, cycling as a means of transport. And we do, rely on other avenues to help spread our positive cycling commitment. And that can be things like campaigning, can be things like creating little adverts or media, or even as humble as including about how excited you are about a new bike path that's going in at your next barbecue or things like that. Just creating that nice positive attitude around how good cycling is, I think, does go a long way. So just got a few examples of, you know, what's been done internationally. And whilst I'm rabbiting on about this, I'll get Marissa to launch a poll and you can have a go at filling this one in. But this first kind of example is from California. They have a bicycle month every year, and they basically just, you know, fill up flyers and bus shelters with different styles of adverts like this one here, just to constantly reiterate to the community that, you know, the cycling community is something that needs to be, you need to be made aware of. Like, they're not going away. They're just people. Like, we need to be considering them like that, and they are vulnerable. So I think that's a really clever messaging there. Got some other ones there, and hopefully that poll has jumped up on your screen now. And the question is, please rate your level of cycling infrastructure knowledge at the completion of this course. So you had that at the start, and now you've got it at the end. This happened a few years ago, several years ago now. This was the Red Cup project, which was trending on Twitter. And basically, lots and lots of different riders around the globe went out to their bike lanes and just popped red cups at the edge of their bike lane, took a photo, and then a few hours later, took a photo of how that cup survived, and invariably the cup was squashed, really to demonstrate that just using paint is really not enough to demarcate the space, and also to show how vulnerable our riders are and how regularly general traffic are using the bicycle lane, you know, as they're performing turning movements or overtaking or things like that. So this one did become quite a big trend. We did have examples of this occurring within Australia and New Zealand and parts of Asia and things like that. Some people decided to put a bit of tomatoes or apples inside their cups as well, just to add to the theatrics. I love a bit of theatre, so that's pretty exciting. But it's nice to see that little community-based kind of activism, I suppose you could call it. This next one is also one that always gets me, which is a fellow in New York who had been advocating for a long time to get a separated, protected bicycle lane on his road to work, but council kept knocking it back, so decided to take matters into his own hands and went to the local warehouse store and bought himself 100 plungers and got some epoxy and just started gluing them down at, you know, pretty regular intervals. And I've got to say, did a pretty good job. It looks like he's also spray painted it all out just to make it nice and neat and, you know, nice regular intervals. So you've got to appreciate the quality of that. Unfortunately, this vigilante's enthusiasm was not met with the same positive response as council, and they did in fact rip it up. And to my knowledge, this is not a protected lane still, so he didn't manage to achieve that objective. But yeah, there you go, just a fun little example there. I've included this one as well. You're welcome to watch this after today's session. This was an ad that was used within Scotland many years ago now, which was See Cyclist Think Horse. That doesn't make sense yet. I just encourage you to watch the video. And this only lasted about 3 months or something like that on TV, because people were filthy about what was going on here. Not about the See Cyclist Think Horse. That wasn't the main thing that was upsetting people. People were very upset that this woman was not riding with her helmet. That is not a legal requirement within the UK, but people still got very upset by that. So there was lots of letters demanding that get rectified. And people were also very upset that she was not riding closer to the wonderful, you know, Bluestone Heritage Curb and Channel there. So they didn't like how far away she was riding. So unfortunately, it wasn't long lasting ad, but still it's got some, I think using humor and entertainment is a really good way of trying to sell messages. And another reason that I thought I'd include this. Okay. As I've talked about a few times now, we do have the final 360-degree video footage for you to review. There are two examples. One is riding through the protected roundabout within Melbourne. The second one I spoke about before is riding through a more conventional roundabout. And as I said, when you're going through this one, have a look behind you and have a look at the vehicle that's oncoming there, because you can try and appreciate as why riding in those environments feels so nervous. There's also a third example at the end, so make sure that you stay on all the way to the end. It is a longer video, that one. I think it goes for like 10 minutes or something. But anyway, I've left a bit of time at this session because I do need to spend, just some minutes now going through the final assessment piece, which is an assignment. And there's a few different paths, I guess you could call it, or a few different ways that you can do this assignment, which is why I just wanted to spend some time right now to chat through it. And you can just ask me your questions while we're in this environment and hopefully sort out all the details. So our LMS, I really hope this looks familiar by now. We've got that 360-degree video that I just mentioned, so you can watch that one. We've got this letter to LGA template. You can click on that and download it. I'm not going to open it up just yet, but you can have a look at that. And then you've got this module 4 assignment. And if I click on the module 4 assignment, and there's a single document in there, I note that if you are from Transport for New South Wales, we've noticed that some of you seem to be having issues with uploading your submission. So please just email training, or give it a go first and see if it works. But if it doesn't work, just email it to us. But everyone else, please just use the LMS. It's just a lot easier for us to coordinate if it's all done through here. Anyway, module 4 assignment. I've got both of these documents up, so I'm just going to open it rather than download it again. The module 4 assignment involves you actually analyzing a real site, and it's a site that you get to pick. Now, you can do step 1 first, or you can do step 2 first. That's up to you. But what we want you to do is pick a site that has existing cycling facilities. So that could be an on-road bike lane. It could be a shared path. It could be a protected bicycle lane. It's your pick. Something where there's bicycle facilities. The step 2 is review BikeSpot and check any existing community concerns. So BikeSpot is the application that's open now, of course. I already got it open. That the Amy Gill Foundation and the federal government and CrowdSpots have launched, where members of the public or anyone can get a map of their network and drop down little pins of where they feel safe or unsafe. And you could use this as, well, I don't really know which site I want to pick, but maybe I look at CrowdSpot and pick a site that has a few of those pins to give me ideas. So just to give you an example, this is where Max lives. He lives in Frankston, down on the coast of Melbourne. And say if I wanted to investigate this intersection, I'd be like, oh, okay, well, someone's already marked a little unsafe spot pin there. So I could click on that and just have a quick review and say, oh, this is what I actually happen to write. That's very coincidental. Vehicles turning right from Overton Road have really restricted views due to the curves on the Nepean Highway. Cycling on the Nepean Highway is a bit hairy. Pretty informal way of writing it. But someone supported me on that. I feel so popular. It's pretty cool. And someone also said the bike lane is in terrible condition in this section of Road 2. RG. Go RG. We're best friends now. So if I was doing this as my location, I would just review that you know, and then I've got that community sentiment kind of at the back of my mind, and that might help with the other parts of this assignment. If you pick a site that doesn't have any markers, that's completely fine. Maybe you want to add a marker after you visit the site that you're going to. So that's another consideration. So it's completely fine if you don't have any markers. We just wanted to show that that is something that you can do. Step 3 is we want you to actually go and visit the site. So pick somewhere that is convenient for you. Pick somewhere close to home or close to the office, or if you're going to pick up the kids or something like that, you know, just make it convenient for you. It doesn't need to be, you know, a significantly dangerous site. In fact, we wouldn't want you to go to a dangerous site. We want to pick somewhere that, you know, you can safely access and is convenient. So we want you to go out there. The reason being, if you look at things on Google Street View, you get one perspective or one, you know, snapshot in time of that's what it would be like. Whereas if you spend a couple minutes out on site, you know, 5 minutes, you can see, you know, how traffic is behaving, how riders would be going through there, and you just get a much better appreciation. All right, so that's all the logistics. Now the fun part begins, which is we've got some questions that are listed below. And I'm just going to skip straight ahead and go to these questions. And these questions are, what infrastructure currently exists? What are the hazards for cyclists? And what could be installed to better improve the safety for cyclists? And what we need from you is we need you to clearly articulate responses to each of those. Once again, what we are actually marking is your ability to use the correct jargon, so the correct terminology, and also identifying the hazards. So we do ask you to include a link of the site that you have inspected. So we can just do a quick check to see, like, if you've noted all the relevant hazards, or would we have picked the same hazards? So we want to make sure that you've got that ability to actually identify what those hazards could be, and then mitigating solutions that could improve the safety for cyclists. So what treatments or infrastructure would you be recommending? So those are the 3 questions you want you to answer. Now, if I go back up to step 4, we say that participants are encouraged to present their responses to the below questions in any form that suits yourselves. So previously we've had people do TikTok videos, we've had people write poems, we've had people do artwork, we've had people get their children involved and they've had like a little play, or we had a storybook recently, which was just divine. Some people just love the opportunity to be creative, and we want to encourage that. So if you've got, you know, a means that you like to express yourself in, we're all for it. We just want to see you answer those questions. Of course, if you want to just answer them in a Word document, or you want to do it in a PowerPoint, that's completely fine. You're not marked on your creativity. It's just an option for you. So if you want to, you know, do something a bit wacky, we're up for it, but we will just be marking you on the answers that you respond and not the creativity. Save and upload this document as well as the responses to the learning management system. So you'll get that's where you just need to make sure that we've got your responses saved and the location that you picked. And this is an optional step that we've included in pink here, which is fill in the letter to LGA's template, which was the other Word document I briefly mentioned, and send your letter to the relevant council or road authority. We ask, if you are going to do that, just please CC us, the training team, in, just so we've got a record of who's doing this, just for our own interests. To show you what that letter is, it is pretty straightforward. You would need to fill in only the sections that are highlighted in pink. And all it says is, I have recently completed the cycling infrastructure technical training course provided by Safe System Solutions and the Amy Gillett Foundation. As part of this course, I inspected a section of Frankston City Council network, cycling network. The site that I visited or assessed was at Overton Road and Nepean Highway in Frankston. I wish to alert council to the following design features that increase the risk of cycling crashes. And that's where you can just copy and paste from your assignment. And I recommend that council looks at implementing the following treatments to improve the safety. And once again, that can just be a copy and paste. The following paragraph may be deleted if it's not applicable, which is just if you've had any community pins being dropped as part of the bike spot thing, you can just put a little link to the bike spot, and that will help to, you know, give a bit of evidence to why you're suggesting that there's issues at the location. And then we get you to sign off and just put your details and things like that. You do not need to do this letter. This is not part of your assessment. We've just found that some people involved in this course do like to go on and actually advocate for that change. And they've just like, well, I've done all this work to, you know, say what's wrong with it. And I would like that to be in the hands of someone that could potentially do something about it. So it's just a template there for those that are interested. But by no means are you graded on that component. So take that in mind. And also appreciate that some of you may be in the LGA that you are actually reviewing. So you're potentially addressing a letter to yourself, which we've also had people do. So yeah, don't put that. You can do that as well, I guess. I hope all of that assignment was clear. There's a few other bits and pieces I wanted to get through, but I'll just double check with Ainsley and Marissa if there's anything I missed about the assignment.
I think we're all good for the assignment, Max. You've covered it well. There hasn't been too many questions coming through.
That's great. That's very positive to hear. So I'll go back into the LMS then, and there was just another little sneak peek thing I wanted to show, which is under the resources tab, under reference documents and resources, we've actually got a file in there which is called Cycling 360 Footage Examples. And you open that one up. Whoops. And it is a PDF document which has 360-degree videos of different types of cycling infrastructure. So if, I don't know, a year from today, you forget exactly what a protected bicycle lane or a bi-directional facility or, you know, what a protected roundabout looks like, we've just given you this as a tool so you can be like, oh yeah, that's what a protected roundabout is. You click on that, it'll take you to YouTube and it'll show you what it feels like riding through that facility. We also just did it for a bit of fun. We added some emojis. So you've got a bit of a legend about, you know, this is what we would consider good stuff, or what could be improved, or things that we just definitely don't recommend and don't want to see more of. So I think if you're going to watch any of them, I'd just do the ones that are please no. So you know exactly we don't want to see any more of this. Yeah, and it'll give you appreciation. So I'd really recommend you download that one, save it on your local drive somewhere, just keep it on your desktop, because no doubt you'll probably, you know, you'll have to refer to these things, and it's very handy to have this as a bit of a reference document for you. So that's the resources. To finish off this course, right down the bottom, we've got a feedback and certificates section. We do have a short feedback section. So that's just an opportunity for you to reflect on how you found the course. We're very, very responsive on these things. Like, we like to ensure that we're giving everyone the best experience that we can provide. So we don't take these things lightly. So please do provide your honest feedback, as it will help with our future editions of this course. We've also got this little folder here, which is, I told you I've got lots of random things to go through. We've got this folder here, which is share your achievement online. And if you click on this one here, This is basically anyone that would be interested in sharing that they've completed this course and they've got the certificate. We've basically done a bit of a spiel about, you know, what this course is. You can copy and paste that as your post. And we've also given you some badges that you can choose from if you wanted to upload that to your social media or your LinkedIn or things like that, just to make it easier for you. And if you want to tag us in it as well, that'd be terrific. Just so we, got that notification. So that's just there to make things easier for you if you're interested in that side of things. Finally, to get your actual certificate, as it suggests, it's not available unless you've completed Module 1 quiz, you've done your Module 2 assignment, Module 3 quiz is done, Module 4 assignment is done, and you've done the feedback form. If you haven't done any of those things or haven't completed them with the 80% or above, you won't be able to click on this and it won't give you your certificate. So it's like an auto-enabled thing. In saying that, if you are having any issues with any of the quizzes or assignments, please do reach out. I should have also mentioned with the Module 4 assignment, I would recommend spending half an hour tops on that particular assignment. We don't want you spending hours on it. You can, of course, you know, with any kind of location, you can pick up, you know, thousands of risks, but that's not really what we want out of this. We just want you to, you know, show that you have got this knowledge that we've been trying to teach over the last couple of weeks, and you're able to identify issues for cyclists and what can be done to improve that. So if it's taking you multiple hours or it's stressing you out, please just reach out because we'll be able to help you out there. That was it from me. Marissa, how'd I go?
Oh, amazing. You've covered everything. I'll just address a couple of the questions that we're getting into the chat. Due date. The due date for the assignment is December the 7th. So I think we've given you a week. Yep. So a week from now, December the 7th, that is the due date. If your assignment from the Module 2 assignment hasn't been marked yet, no need to worry. Our markers are making their way through grading all of the submissions as we speak, so they will get to yours very shortly and you will receive a notification in your inbox when that has been graded. We've got a question, can we still access the online module after the course is finished? Yes, you absolutely can. So the online portal is available to you for up to 6 months. So the resources are available for you during that time. After 6 months, we do close the course down. So if there is anything you'd like to download, please do so. Download as many of the resources as you would like to. I think I've covered everything. We've got a question, Ainsley. There are a couple of people in the office, small town. Can they use the same site? Or Max?
I'm happy for you to use the same site. Just make sure that you've done your own assignments and you're using your own words, but more than happy for you to have a look out there together. And why don't you go out there, take a nice big selfie as well? We love seeing selfies. That'd be great.
Absolutely. I think that's about it. Are there any other questions? So we do require an 80% mark to pass each of the tasks. I don't know if there's any other questions. Ainsley, anything?
No, I don't think so. I think that's all pretty much covered.
Yeah. We've just had another in the Q&A. If you're not able to complete the assignment by the due date next week, just send us an email. We can provide you with an extension. That's no problem at all.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marissa. Thank you, Ainsley. It's wonderful to have you both joining along and helping moderate these sessions. And thank you, everyone, for participating and sharing your own insights and your own experiences within the cycling space. And I'm really excited to have delivered this all and excited that we've got this new, enthusiastic bunch of people that are, ready to get their cycling networks up to the best standard that we can offer. And yeah, it's been a pleasure having you all, and I wish you all the best with your cycling projects going forward.
Yes, thank you, Max, for facilitating the program, and thanks, Ainsley, for joining, and thank you, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed the course, and any issues at all, please get in contact with us in the training inbox. So yeah, thanks, everyone.
Have a lovely day. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Happy cycling.